Nick Engstead here from the Locked On NBA podcast to bring you our lottery mock draft. I went to Tankathon, did a simulation, and this is how it turned out. We had a little bit of work at the top. The Orlando Magic slide up to the number 1 pick. Oklahoma City slides up 2 spots to get number 2. Houston falls to number 3. Detroit falls to number 4. And then it goes chalk from there with the Pacers, Blazers, Kings, Pelicans, Spurs, Wizards, Knicks, Thunder again, Charlotte Hornets, and then the Cleveland Cavaliers round out the lottery. We are going to go one by one to each of our Locked On hosts to get their pick, who they would pick if their team actually falls in this spot.
With the first pick of the Locked On NBA mock draft, the Orlando Magic select Paolo Banchero. I'm Philip Rosenreich, the host of the Locked On Magic podcast, and the reason the Magic take Paolo Banchero is quite simple. They need a guy who can create his own shot. They need a guy who can be a primary scorer. They've got a lot of great secondary players. They got a lot of really good young talent, but they need a guy that they can truly orbit around. And what we saw during the NCAA tournament, what we saw all year at Duke, was Paolo Banchero is that star kind of player, a guy who can work from the outside and the inside, a guy who has size and defensive potential and capabilities, but really this is about adding his scoring and his scoring ability. This is a guy who's got tremendous footwork and just is a tremendous scorer, and that's just frankly what the Magic need, especially for a team that was one of the worst offensive teams in the league. So the Orlando Magic will take Paolo Banchero with the first pick in the Locked On NBA mock draft.
With the second pick in the 2022 Locked On NBA mock draft, the Oklahoma City Thunder select Jabari Smith, forward out of Auburn. The Oklahoma City Thunder finally get lottery luck, and they jump up from 4 to 2, and my best player on my big board, Jabari Smith Jr., was available after Paolo Banchero went number 1. This pick was really between him and Chet Holmgren, and maybe Sam Presti would lean towards Chet Holmgren just based on the tantalizing nature of his 7-foot frame with guard-like skills. But Jabari Smith Jr. can fit seamlessly alongside Josh Giddey and SGA with his 3-and-D potential. Richard Stamen, that Mavs draft on Twitter, and our Locked On expert, has compared him to Klay Thompson. And so whenever you're trying to fit 2 guards together that are ball dominant in SGA and Josh Giddey, you need to find a player who can fit into that equation without mucking it up and adding another ball dominant player, but still having high upside. And that's exactly what Jabari Smith Jr. does. He can play elite defense, he can score very well in the offensive end, and he can allow for SGA to take over in isolation and Josh Giddey to set him up with his elite playmaking. So that's where we're going here on the Locked On mock draft. I'm Rylan Stiles, host of the Locked On Thunder podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.
With the third overall pick in the Locked On NBA mock draft, the Houston Rockets select Chet Holmgren out of Gonzaga. What's up? Jackson Gatlin here from over at Locked On Rockets. And look, the Rockets can't go wrong with any of the top 3 big man prospects in this year's NBA draft. Being third on the board isn't as good as being number 1 on the board, but being able to come away with Chet Holmgren is still a huge get for this Houston Rockets team. He has size, he has shooting, and he's got the potential to be the number 1 player coming out of this year's draft, a true unicorn in every sense of the word, a guy that you can slot in at the 5 if you're Houston. Maybe you run him at the 4 alongside Alperen Sengun or Christian Wood, depending on what their lineup looks like next season. A lot of flexibility to be had with Chet Holmgren and a very, very bright future when you pair him with Jalen Green.
With the 4th pick in the 2022 Locked On NBA mock draft, the Detroit Pistons select Shaedon Sharpe, 6'5" guard out of Kentucky. In this lottery mock draft, the Detroit Pistons fell from number 3 to number 4, which isn't that bad, but that takes off Banchero, Chet Holmgren, and Jabari Smith. That leaves a bunch of guards and a bunch of wings available at number 4, and I feel like Sharpe is, as of right now, one of the more interesting prospects in the entire draft. Yes, he's technically coming out of Kentucky, but he did not play a single game of college basketball, so you don't really have a ton of tape to really go off. Despite this, the 19-year-old has rose up a bunch of people's draft boards drawing comparisons to Paul George, Bradley Beal, and Jalen Green. And any type of player like that would fit, I feel like, pretty well next to Cade Cunningham. If the Pistons do miss out on one of the big men, finding Cade Cunningham's long-term backcourt mate, you get a guy like that, I feel like a lot of Pistons fans would be happy. Could have went with Jaden Ivey right here, but I find Shaedon Sharpe to be a bit more interesting as of right now. So the Detroit Pistons select Shaedon Sharpe with the number 4 overall pick in this year's Locked On NBA mock draft.
With the 5th pick in the Locked On NBA mock draft, the Indiana Pacers select Jaden Ivey from Purdue. I'm Tony East with the Locked On Pacers podcast. And Ivey's a really good fit for what the Pacers have and need. They basically just need talent at this point after winning just 25 games, having their third worst season in franchise history, but a speedy guard who can dominate the game when Tyrese Halliburton is floating more off the ball or when he's out of the game is a fantastic fit for this Pacers team. And Ivey, somewhat local, going to Purdue, just an hour from Indianapolis, would be an excellent fit for this franchise. His speed, burst, his power, his athleticism just makes him such a dynamic player, and why he's just such a highly regarded prospect. Got up to 17 points per game this season for Purdue. The passing isn't quite all the way there, but definitely showed flashes of playmaking. Shot the ball pretty well to start the season. Looks like he can be a scorer from basically all over the floor and a pretty good creator everywhere. His defense is solid thanks to his athleticism and speed as well. He just seems like an athletic freak who can do a lot with the ball. And that's a good fit for any team, but especially a Pacers team looking to add talent and dynamic play to their franchise. So the Pacers take Ivey at 5, and they're very happy to do it.
With the 6th pick in the Locked On NBA mock draft, the Portland Trailblazers select Keegan Murray. I'm Mike Richmond, host of Locked On Blazers, your past first point guard. And if the Blazers do remain in 6th, they keep those lottery odds right where they are. With the 6th best lottery odds, they end up picking 6th in the draft. Keegan Murray seems like a pretty darn good outcome. One of the most productive players in college basketball last season. Fits a position of need on a team desperate for forwards. Keegan Murray could help right away for the Blazers and has some upside to be part of the future. I think they'd be pretty excited if Keegan Murray's on the board when it comes down to it in June.
This is Matt George, host of the Locked On Kings podcast, and with the 7th pick in this Locked On NBA lottery mock draft, Sacramento Kings take AJ Griffin out of Duke. Now, I'll be honest with you, if I had the ability to trade this draft pick, I absolutely would. Unfortunately, was not able to do so here. But if the Kings do end up at number 7, where they're projected to end up, don't be surprised at all if they heavily shop and ultimately move on from this pick. The Kings are looking for immediate impact players. And while I like the upside of a guy like AJ Griffin, he theoretically fits a need for the Sacramento Kings with their lack of wing depth. I like his potential as a defender, his potential as a shooter, his size, his athleticism. Love all those things. But can you expect AJ Griffin or too many rookies from this draft class, period, to be immediate impact type players that are going to get the Kings from the cellar in the West to in the playoffs? That's the expectation for this team as early as next year. They're going to need a big turnaround. That means big impact from starter and rotation players. AJ Griffin would not be a bad player to have on this Kings squad. Don't know if he does enough, but that's who I'll end up taking, and I'll take him with comfort and happiness here on the mock draft.
With the 8th pick in the Locked On NBA mock draft, the New Orleans Pelicans select Bennedict Mathurin, wing from Arizona. I'm Jake Madison with the Locked On Pelicans podcast and Locked On NBA. With Zion Williamson healthy next season, the starting lineup and first guys off the bench are set for the Pels, which means they can go in any direction with the 8th pick. And at this spot in the draft, Mathurin is the right mix of best player available with high upside. As a sophomore at Arizona, he showed off a multi-dimensional offensive game that is tailor-made for the NBA. He's comfortable inside the arc, but more importantly for this Pelicans team that was one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the league, he's a guy that excels at both pull-up and catch-and-shoot threes. Defensively, he has moments of lockdown defense, showing what he can do at the NBA level and has the tools to guard multiple positions, but he's definitely over-aggressive at times, and he relies a little bit too much on his long mid-range game when he gets himself into trouble, so there's room for development. With CJ McCollum getting older, and this Pelicans team going to be very expensive soon, getting a guy that can be a lead scoring option after a couple of years development at 8 on a cheap rookie deal, that's exactly the type of long-term thinking the New Orleans Pelicans need to continue building the sustainable success that they are hoping for. So for more on Zion Williamson and the rest of this Pelicans team, that Jose Alvarado there right behind you, be sure to check out the Locked On Pelicans podcast.
With the number 9 pick in the Locked On NBA 2022 mock draft, the San Antonio Spurs select Jalen Duren out of Memphis. I am Jeff Garcia with Locked On Spurs, and here's why the Spurs, or at least this case, Locked On Spurs, decided to go with the big man, Jalen Duren. He's exactly what the Spurs need to address their biggest need in the offseason, and that is size. After Jakob Poeltl, the depth chart for the Spurs is relatively weak. You have Zach Collins, who is coming off an injury that set him away from the NBA for over a year and a half. Still needs time to get back to form. And, of course, there's still unproven rookie Jock Landale. 6'11", 250 pounds, excuse me. He's exactly what the Spurs need. He's averaged 12 points per game last season with Memphis. Shot 60% from the field in 25 minutes. He's physically gifted, good leaping ability, mobile. He is exactly what the Spurs need to counter the modern centers in today's NBA. A 7'5" wingspan can cover a lot of ground on both ends of the court. Agile, lateral quickness. He's exactly what the Spurs team needs. This is Jeff Garcia with Locked On Spurs. Subscribe to Locked On Spurs wherever you get your favorite podcast.
What's going on? My name is Ed Oliver from the Locked On Wizards podcast. And with the 10th pick of the Locked On NBA mock draft, the Washington Wizards select Malaki Branham out of Ohio State. Great player, 6'5", 180 pounds. Freshman, was Big Ten Rookie of the Year, 2022 All Big Ten, and made the Big Ten All Freshman team. Went to St. Vincent St. Mary High School. Is from Columbus, Ohio. We all know who else went to that high school too, so maybe there's some pedigree there too. But the Wizards need talent. This guy averaged 13 points a game, 49% from the field, 41% from the three-point line, and 83% from the free throw line. Was almost a 50-40-90 guy. We could use some talent. He's athletic. He can get to the rim. He's a slasher, great finisher around the rim, can finish above the rim and could create a shot for himself. The Wizards need talent, especially at the guard position. So Malaki Branham is a combo guard that can come in and immediately help the Washington Wizards. Thank you for listening. Peace.
With the 11th pick of the Locked On NBA mock draft, the New York Knicks select Dyson Daniels, guard, out of the G League Ignite. I am Alex Wolf. I'm one of the hosts of Locked On Knicks, and we were ecstatic to get this pick and be able to take Dyson Daniels here. The Knicks really just kind of need a player like Daniels. You know, we think that he'll fit in great in between Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett. He's long. He plays great defense. He can, attack the basket some. The shot is a little bit of a work in progress, but he has ideal NBA size at 6'8" and 6'11" wingspan with very legit guard skills. So we're super happy to get him here. We think he's going to fit in great with the sort of point guard by committee that the Knicks will hopefully run with him, Quickley, and RJ Barrett as far as initiating the offense next year, maybe even Julius Randle if he's still around. So really ecstatic to have him. Almost took Johnny Davis, but Dyson Daniels is our guy. And we've been talking about him a lot on Locked On Knicks, so definitely be sure to check us out there. Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast.
With the 12th pick in the 2022 Locked On NBA mock draft, the Oklahoma City Thunder select Jeremy Sochan, forward out of Baylor University. I'm Rylan Stiles, host of the Locked On Thunder podcast, and Jeremy Sochan is likely the best defender in this NBA draft class. Now, at this pick, the Thunder would have liked to have Jalen Duren fall down to them, and maybe they would even trade up to get Jalen Duren. But given the circumstances, as Dyson Daniel goes off the board one pick before the Thunder, Jeremy Sochan is a really nice option to create roster versatility for the Thunder, who need to improve defensively and need to improve on the three-point line, which their number 2 overall pick, Jabari Smith Jr., helps with the number 2, helps with the three-point line and defense. Jeremy Sochan could be the best defender in this class, and you're putting together a team at that point that's very young, very versatile, and can complement SGA and Josh Giddey in the team's quest to get out of this rebuilding phase and back into title contention. While it will take some time, it could happen with Jeremy Sochan at the helm with Jabari Smith Jr. complementing your 2 stars.
With the 13th pick in the Locked On NBA mock draft, the Charlotte Hornets select Johnny Davis out of Wisconsin. I'm Walker Mail from the Locked On Hornets podcast alongside Doug Branson. And we had an interesting decision to make with the Hornets having the 13th pick and the 15th pick. I wanted to go with the best center. It's well documented that is a huge need for the Charlotte Hornets, but Doug texted me with an interesting scenario once the 13th pick was on the board.
Well, I saw Johnny Davis sitting there available because a few teams above us may have reached a little bit. I'm not judging, but they got the player they wanted, but they may have reached. And Johnny Davis, a player that I think really would complement in the long term, complement LaMelo Ball well because he can defend. He's long, he's athletic, and I think Johnny Davis would be a perfect 2 guard next to LaMelo Ball long term. Because here's the thing: the Hornets, yes, they needed center, they need interior defense, but they need defense everywhere. They need perimeter defense too, Walker.
Yeah, Johnny Davis averaged 19.7 points per game, had an excellent year
Not
in the
bad.
Big Ten this past season, a 2-year player with the Badgers. I think the shooting can improve. Even if the three-point shooting wasn't great, his free throw shooting was sitting at about 80%. I don't think he's going to fail in the NBA. I think he's a guy that can help out in a bunch of different areas. And with that 15th overall selection, I think the Charlotte Hornets can select that center that they desperately need, along with maybe picking one up in free agency. If you want to hear more about the Charlotte Hornets leading up to the NBA draft, you can check out Locked On Hornets wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on Twitter at Walker Mail, Doug on Twitter at Doug Branson LOH, and the show handle on Twitter at Locked On Hornets.
With the 14th pick in this mock draft, the Cleveland Cavaliers select Ochai Abgaji, the wing from Kansas. I'm Chris Manning, one of the hosts of the Locked On Cavs podcast. And Abgaji, this past year's Final Four most outstanding player, fits a real need for the Cleveland Cavaliers. This team needs wings, and they particularly need wings who can shoot. They need wings who can provide support for Darius Garland, for Evan Mobley, for Jared Allen. There's perhaps no player who fits that 3-and-D mold more in this range of the draft than Abgaji. Yes, he's a little bit older. Yes, maybe there's some upside concerns, but for a Cavs team that has its high-end talent, or at least the players I think they believe are their high-end talent, they have a need for a guy like this to maybe cover for some of Isaac Okora's deficiencies, for Lamar Stevens' deficiencies, and he just fills a need on this roster. You don't always maybe want to draft for need. There are other guys in this class I think they could strongly look at and could fill other needs this team has. But at 14, Abgaji feels like a guy that could come in and play and fills a real need. It's hard to not like this pick for the Cavs if it ends up falling this way.